Gold has shaped economies. It has fueled empires, and it has outlasted every currency humans have ever created. But its true story isn't just about wealth. It's about power. And throughout history, the most intense battles over gold didn't happen in mines or markets, but in the hands of governments. This video reveals the hidden history of the greatest gold theft the world has ever seen, a theft carried out in plain sight, rooted in the very nature of gold itself. For centuries, gold was the one thing governments could not counterfeit. It couldn't decay, couldn't be printed, and always kept its shine. Whether in London, Cairo, or Beijing, gold was once the closest thing humanity had to a universal truth. Until governments learned how to steal from themselves. When people think of a gold heist, they imagine masked thieves, armored trucks, or Hollywood-style missions. But the biggest gold thefts in history didn't involve guns or tunnels. They happened through signatures, through clauses written into laws, and through silent strokes of pens inside closed rooms where no camera was ever allowed. Because when a nation quietly manipulates its own supply of gold, people don't call it theft. They call it something softer: policy. To understand how this game began, we must go back to a time when gold wasn't just an asset to store, but the money itself, the very thing that defined the value of economies. In the 19th century, the world ran on the gold standard. Every major currency, from the dollar to the pound or the franc, was backed by a fixed amount of gold. If you held a banknote, you could walk into a central bank and demand the gold it represented. It was a system built on trust and discipline. A government couldn't just print money freely, unless it had enough gold to back it. But unfortunately, discipline has never been humanity's strength. When war broke out and debts piled up, governments quietly bent the rules. They printed more paper money than gold. They actually held a little at first, then much more. The gold standard slowly turned into a glittering illusion. Vaults remained sealed. People believed the gold was still there. And that belief alone kept the system running until the day it collapsed. World War I was the first true global gold theft in every sense. As resources ran dry, European nations suspended the gold standard, seized citizens' gold, and gave them fragile promises. Printed on paper, banks locked their reserves, and gold vanished from circulation. It wasn't stolen by masked robbers. It was taken by governments themselves to fuel the war machine. After the war, economies collapsed under crushing debt. Currencies fell into hyperinflation, and people could only watch helplessly as their life savings evaporated. The German mark became almost worthless. A Hungarian ruble followed the same fate. The only thing that retained its value was gold, and that is exactly what made it dangerous, because it exposed the naked truth hidden behind paper money. So governments decided to control that illusion themselves. In 1930, amid the Great Depression, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102. This order banned Americans from owning gold in coin or bullion form. They were forced to surrender their gold at $1.67 per ounce, the official price at that time. They had absolutely no choice. Either hand over their gold or face prison. And just months later, the government raised the price of gold to 30s an ounce. In the blink of an eye, Washington quietly increased the value of the gold it now held by 7. Meanwhile, ordinary Americans were blatantly robbed. And ironically, it was completely legal. It was one of the boldest financial maneuvers in history, and it worked. Gold remained firmly in the hands of the government. People were left with nothing but paper, and the promise that it was backed by gold, a promise maintained, even though they could never again exchange those notes for gold. It was theft disguised as stability. And from that moment on, the manipulation of gold became a habit for governments, under pressure. If gold determined the value of money, then controlling gold meant controlling reality itself. By the end of World War II, the United States had become the world's gold superpower. Europe lay in ruins, while America's vaults overflowed, with more than 20 million tons of gold, roughly 2/3 of all the gold on Earth. This dominance allowed the U.S. to shape a new world order at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. Under the Bretton Woods system, all major currencies were pegged to the U.S. dollar, and the dollar was backed by gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. In theory, this meant foreign governments could bring their dollars and redeem them for gold at any time. Gold, in reality, meant the entire global economy now had to trust the United States. That illusion worked perfectly for a while. But trust, like gold, has limits. In the 1950s and 1960s, America began spending far more than it earned. On the wars in Korea and Vietnam, on the space race, and on numerous domestic programs, dollars flowed overseas faster than gold flowed in. By the late 1960s, The amount of dollars circulating worldwide far exceeded the gold backing them. Europe saw this clearly. And so did French President Charles de Gaulle. He was no fool. He saw the imbalance and decided to challenge the U.S. In 1965, he sent a French warship to New York Harbor, demanding billions of U.S. dollars be exchanged for real gold, shipped back to France. Other nations soon followed. Every month, tons of gold drained from U.S. reserves. To slow this outflow, the U.S. and its allies formed a secret coalition called the London Gold Pool. It was a coordinated effort between the U.S., the U.K., and 6 European central banks to keep the price of gold fixed at $35 an ounce. Whenever the price of gold showed signs of rising, meaning confidence in the dollar was falling, this group would release gold into the market to pull the price back down. This method worked until it didn't. And by 1960, the pressure had exceeded its limits. The alliance collapsed, and the outflow of gold accelerated dramatically. America's gold reserves fell from over 20,000 tons to just about 8,000 tons. Global gold was quite literally leaving shipment by shipment. And then the breaking point arrived. On August 15th, 1901, President Richard Nixon appeared on live television with a calm smile and a reassuring voice. He announced that the United States would temporarily suspend the convertibility of dollars into gold. It sounded like a simple administrative measure, but in reality, it was the most important financial decision of the 20th century. Overnight, Nixon ended the Bretton Woods system, and with it, the final link between money and gold. In effect, the United States defaulted on its promise to redeem dollars for gold, but never called it a default. This was the ultimate gold heist. For the first time in history, a nation kept both the gold and the world's trust. Because even though other countries still held dollars, those dollars were no longer backed by anything. The gold stayed in Fort Knox, and the paper money kept circulating. And the world continued pretending the system was still functioning. To maintain that illusion, the United States built a new foundation for its currency. Not on gold, but on oil. Through agreements with Saudi Arabia and OPEC, Washington ensured that global oil would be priced exclusively in dollars, ushering in the petrodollar system. At this point, countries needed dollars not to redeem gold, but to buy energy, and that demand kept the dollar strong, even without gold behind it. The world quietly shifted from one form of backing to another, from gold to geopolitics, and through all of this, gold never stopped moving. It just moved in the shadows. While the public was told that gold remained safely in vaults, governments quietly bought, sold, leased, and swapped gold behind closed doors. Each transaction recorded under the label of monetary operations, and every manipulation justified with one word: stability, not a crime, but policy. After 1971, gold was said to be obsolete. Money became digital. Debt ballooned without limit, and economists called gold a barbaric relic. But power never throws away something it can still quietly use. Governments didn't abandon gold. They just changed the story. Instead of tying currency value to gold, they began manipulating it from behind the curtain. The official narrative said gold no longer mattered. Yet for decades after Nixon's shock, central banks quietly traded and lent gold to one another. They called it reserve management. But in reality, it was the same old game, using gold to control the market, while never admitting it. The first major turning point occurred in the late 1990s, when the entire world believed that globalization and paper finance had completely replaced this traditional metal. The Bank of England, under Finance Minister Gordon Brown, suddenly announced it would sell more than half of the UK's gold reserves, nearly 4 tons, citing diversification. The sale sent global gold prices to their lowest point in 20 years, and just a few years later, gold prices tripled. While the UK had sold right at the bottom, critics called it Brown's bottom. And many whispered that it wasn't a mistake, but an act that helped major financial institutions cover their short positions in gold, essentially rescuing big players with taxpayers' money. Whatever the truth, this remained a turning point. Western governments no longer hoarded gold the way they once did. They began managing gold, treating the world's oldest form of money as a new financial instrument, while the rest of the world watched quietly. From the 2000s, countries like China, Russia, and India began quietly buying back gold, not for jewelry or nostalgia, but for power. They understood what the West tried to ignore. Gold may no longer back currencies, but it still backs trust. And in a crisis, trust is everything. Moving into the new millennium, another uncomfortable truth emerged. No one really knows how much gold each government actually holds. Take the United States, for example. According to official figures, the U.S. holds about 8,000 tons of gold, the largest reserve in the world, stored in places like Fort Knox and the Federal Reserve's New York vault. But that number has never been independently audited. Since 1950, every few years, transparency is requested, and every time it gets forgotten. The vaults remain sealed, And the public is reassured with blurry photos and guided tours showing gold bars that may have sat there for decades. Why all the secrecy? Because gold is not just a reserve. It's a thermometer for global confidence. If the world believed the US didn't actually have the gold it claims, the entire global financial system would shake. And once trust is lost, it's the one thing no government can print. After the 2008 financial crisis, the narrative shifted again, as trust in banks and currencies collapsed sharply. Suddenly, gold reappeared not everywhere as a standard of value, but as a sign that central banks that once sold gold were now buying it back. Germany demanded the US and France return its gold stored in New York and Paris, then the Netherlands and Austria followed. They called it gold repatriation. But the message was very clear. We trust ourselves more than we trust you, and by the 2010s, this movement spread widely. China increased its official gold reserves every month for years, while Russia doubled its gold holdings. In less than a decade, countries cut off from the dollar system, like Iran and Turkey, began using gold in trade to evade sanctions. It was a quiet resistance happening bit by bit, while the United States protected the dollar through other means. When gold was pushed aside, what truly backed the value of the dollar became geopolitical power, military strength, energy, and a global banking network running through New York. But even that foundation began to crack. Because while the West printed trillions of dollars after 2008, emerging economies diversified their reserves into something no central bank could ever devalue: metal. By the early 2020s, something extraordinary happened. Central banks around the world bought more than 1,000 tons of gold in a single year, the largest accumulation in modern history. And they weren't buying it for jewelry. They were fortifying themselves for what they believed was coming next. Another reset of the world order. The language has changed, but the logic remains the same. Any empire cornered by debt eventually returns to its gold. Some confiscate it, others reprice it. Some pretend their gold still exists even when it no longer does. The manipulation no longer happens in vaults, but directly in the market. Today's global gold price is no longer decided by shipments of real gold, but by futures contracts, traded in London and New York. They're just paper promises of gold delivery, most of which doesn't exist. For every ounce of real gold, there are dozens of paper ounces being traded. This keeps gold prices stable, or depending on how you see it, artificially low, artificially suppressed. It's the same tactic gold pools of the 1960s once used. Controlling perception means controlling value. Meanwhile, digital money, inflation, and political division are eroding the world's confidence in currencies once again. And every time trust dies, people return to gold. Not because it pays interest or generates profit, but because it doesn't know how to lie. That's why this story is not over yet. The new kind of gold theft is no longer about governments taking gold from citizens, but governments taking gold from each other. It's a race to rewrite the rules of the game before the next crisis decides everything. And the United States still claims to own the largest gold reserve. Europe still holds a significant amount, but Asia, led by China, now controls most of the world's new gold supply through mining, refining, and state-level purchases. For the first time in a century, the balance of metal power is shifting eastward. And history shows, whenever gold moves, empires move with it. When Spain's gold fleets dried up in the 1600s, their empire faded too, and when Britain's gold reserves collapsed. After the two world wars, its global power vanished. And now, as the dollar system bears record high debt, gold once again whispers a warning. Because if the US can no longer hold the world's promises printed on paper, then someone else will try to hold it with metal. The model that began in 1930, when governments manipulated gold to maintain control, is now repeating on a global scale. The only difference is that this time, the manipulation isn't to preserve the old order, but to replace it. Because in the end, gold has never been just a metal. It is a mirror reflecting what nations truly believe about themselves. When they hoard gold, it means they fear the future. When they sell gold, it means they think they can control the future. And when they lie about gold, it means they have already lost control. Every government that touched gold has tried to bend it to its will. But none succeeded for long, because gold does not obey politics, policies, or printing presses. It obeys physics and the law of scarcity. And in a world drowning in debt that makes gold dangerous, the great gold theft is far from over. It has never truly stopped. It has only become more polite, wrapped in the language of economics and the rituals of central banks. And the next time you hear a government say, "Don't worry, the gold is safe," remember that it is always safe until the day it isn't. Gold never disappears, it only changes hands. And each time it does, the balance of power is rewritten. As the world moves toward a new reset, one big question remains: who will control this metal? when the dust settles? Thank you for watching. If this video gave you a new perspective, don't forget to like and subscribe to see more content like this.